Joining us right now, he is the National Right to Work Committee president, and we're going to discuss President Biden and what he has plans with his pals at the AFL-CIO, and it's our friend President Mark Mix. Thank you for joining us once again, Mark Mix.
John, good to be with you, and thanks for the opportunity to chat about the recent speech by Biden at the AFL-CIO convention.
Mark, talk a little bit about that, and especially something that should frighten everyone is this business of Biden and the support for the so-called ProAct.
Yeah, absolutely, John. That's probably the primary objective of organized labor in this legislative session, a bill that's already passed the House of Representatives with no committee hearings and no testimony. It is on pending in the Senate committee. The bill would first and foremost wipe out all 27 right-to-work laws across the country. Those laws are very simple. They say that workers can join unions, participate in unions, and run for office in unions and give their entire paycheck to unions if they want to, but they can't lose their job if they decide they don't want to financially support the labor union. They're very, very simple. They're in place in 27 states, and the ProAct would wipe them all out by federal decree. Additionally, in that bill, there's a move toward card check unionization, taking away opportunities for secret ballot elections for union certification. That means that, John, three of my buddies and I can show up at your front porch and have you sign this card saying that, hey, we can say everything we want. We can say you're going to get your pay raise or you get more insurance. And that card, the signature on that card, turns out to be a vote for unionization, and is very, very difficult to withdraw. That's in there. Secondary boycotts, the idea that unions can go protest at a customer's house or a customer's business, and that customer calls the target, the company that's trying to be unionized, and says, what's going on? I got union people all over my shop over here. They want you to recognize the union. What do I do about this? And so far, under American labor law, that's illegal, but the secondary boycott is something that would be authorized by the ProAct. So it's pending in the Senate. They've got little time to get it done with the elections looming on the horizon, John, and I think politically there are a lot of folks that probably say, we don't want to get into that. We're glad to mouth support for it, but if we actually vote for it, it's going to be damaging to the economy, like most of the policies that Joe Biden has that involve big labor.
Mark Mix, it's frightening even that President Biden would even, this is so different than what President Trump would do, but just the fact that he supports this ProAct is, to me, that shows how much they just control the Biden administration.
Yeah, absolutely. When he came on the stage in Philadelphia the other day, he to standing ovations of union officials, not rank and file workers, frankly, John, because there's a big and a growing divide between rank and file workers and the so-called union officials that represent them. And he came out and talked about you're the ones that brought me here, and all the money and all the power that you give me, and you guys are you go to the dance, you go home from the dance with the ones that brought you, and all this good stuff. And frankly, it's just amazing to hear what he's got to say about, union, being the most pro-union president in American history. If you're in the energy sector, if you were working on the Keystone Pipeline, or you're working on an oil rig, a wildcat, or out on federal lands doing exploration and drilling, 14,000 of those types of employees who all had union cards in their pocket were basically on the unemployment line after Joe Biden took office. And, the union officials that represent those workers endorsed him, gave money to him, and helped him get elected, which is true. He says that openly. They were the reason why he got elected. But yet, when we think about, the Trump election in 2016, we know this, that rank-and-file workers in Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio and Illinois and Indiana, those states where Trump won, surprisingly, it goes without saying that rank-and-file union members crossed over from the advice, and I'm using my finger quotes here, John, the advice that union officials gave them about who to vote for, and voted for Donald Trump, who wanted to secure our borders and lower taxes and lower government regulations and reduce government regulations. And yet that agenda, which is right on the sweet spot for most Americans, particularly most Americans in the workplace that are now paying $6 for a gallon of gas and they can't believe the prices at the grocery store when they go there to shop for food for their families. That disconnect is growing wider and wider, but yet the mainstream media touts this speech to the working people of America. And frankly, John, as you know, only 6.1% of the private sector workforce is unionized today. So when he's up there talking about labor and labor policy and all this, he's trying to give favors to that very, very small group of union elites that are the ones that, quote, give him the money to get reelected or to get elected.
Folks, again, we're speaking with National Right to Work Committee President Mark Mix. And Mark's, just so people have an understand, there's an awful lot of political spending at stake, and they're not afraid to spend it the way they did in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely, John. When we think about political spending and what the media spins out there is that, you have the Soroses and the Koch brothers, and you have the RNC, the Republican National Committee, the Democrat National Committee, and you have other, hedge fund titans that are out there pouring millions of dollars into races, which they are. But when you tally up the money that you organized labor spends on politics, which is, there's a couple different ways to look at it, but the most base way to look at it is what they report on their LM2 forms and their political action reports with the government every 2 years after these elections. And it's easy to find almost $2 billion in political spending. And then if you start overlaying the state activity from the state unions that don't file these types of reports because they don't have private sector workers like the NEA and other unions that represent government employees, the number grows so dramatically and so quickly that it's enormous, and people, it's almost unbelievable. But when Justice Alito ruled in our Janus versus AFSCME case at the U.S. Supreme Court almost 4 years ago to the day, John, he said that everything that government unions do is political because they're trying to redress and control the direction of government. And we've seen that in the schools, and we're seeing that, unfortunately, we're seeing it in the schools and just how powerful they are. But all that money is basically deemed to be political, and so they're trying to elect the bosses that they will sit down at the table with and negotiate with. And so once you start adding those numbers in, you can get to 10, 11, $12 billion every 2 years for political and lobbying activity.
Folks, again, we'll speak with our friend Mark Mix. And Mark, can you touch on also the situation with AFL-CIO leader Frank Schneider in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I wish I could, John. That was one of those great mysteries that kind of popped up right before the AFL-CIO convention in Philadelphia. He was supposed to be named the state president of the AFL-CIO, and all of a sudden, there's a press release put out that says he's no longer going to be the president. They've put somebody else in, and Liz Schuler, the new president of the AFL-CIO, who replaced Richard Trumka, who passed away last year, she basically said, it's an internal matter, nothing happened there. But, boy, John, it seems like to me that the Office of Labor Management Standards at the Department of Labor ought to be interested in what happened there, because if it's financial malfeasance, then the rank-and-file workers across the state of Pennsylvania need to know about that. They need to know what happened. Just like the bosses of the UAW, of which 14 top executives are in jail today for financial malfeasance and stealing and using union members' money to go to Palm Springs and play golf and buy $400 bottles of champagne. It's kind of a cover-up right now. It'd be interesting to see what happened there and whether any information comes out about what Mr. Schneider did to basically deny him the presidency, the office of the presidency of the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO when he was, I guess, duly elected to be sworn in at the convention in Philadelphia.
Wow. Mark, can you just also go back on the ProAct? That is really amazing, simply because, the states that have become right-to-work states, Florida, North Carolina, I believe Ohio, it's, there's a lot of people that felt that it's tragic that if Rhode Island would pivot into that, how Rhode Island really could have stood out in New England, probably I think the closest right-to-work state would have been Ohio. But that's incredible. Boy, they never let down their guard. They're always trying to cut in, and felt they finally had a president that would try to push across this ProAct to get rid of the right-to-work status.
Yeah, well, actually, West Virginia is the closest now. West Virginia and Virginia are both right-to-work states. Ohio's not a right-to-work state yet, John. We're working on that.
Okay.
But we'll get there, absolutely. But yeah, you're right. The idea of union officials and their opposition is so crystal clear as to why, because they want the money. They don't want to have to go out and sell their product to workers. They don't know how to do that. Frankly, since 1937, when the Supreme Court upheld the federal Wagner Act, which is now known as the National Labor Relations Act, they have had government authority and government privilege to say to you, John, look, if you don't pay us, you don't work. That's the federal policy. And so, after this power that developed from that point to the end of World War II, 1946, union officials grew astronomically. Union membership and union power grew during that period. In 1947, the Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Act, which said states could, by affirmative vote, outlaw the closed shop, which is in place in 23 states where, literally, if you don't pay union dues, the union official goes to the employer, your employer, and says, John hasn't paid, John has to be fired. And that's the way the law works, and it's federally imposed. And so the states that have right to work protect workers against that. But because it's a federally granted privilege to the states to pass right to work laws, Joe Biden could, with a stroke of a pen, wipe out all 27 right-to-work laws and go back under this federal forced unionism authority that exists since the 1930s.
And before I let you go, could you just highlight some of just say that like the top 5 or top 10 right-to-work states that they're really thriving with business?
Yeah, in Michigan, Indiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. I'll keep going if you want, John. But
wow.
Suffice to say, that's where the growth in America is. Nevada, Arizona, Idaho. Those are the states that are actually growing and creating opportunities for young families to have a better standard of living than in unfortunately, states like Rhode Island and Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York, and California and Illinois, and those states that still allow union officials to have that dramatic power over workers.
Folks, he is the National Right to Work Committee President, Mark Mix. Mark, before I let you go, how can people log on to learn more about the National Right to Work Committee?
Yeah, John, thanks. They can find us on that amazing internet at www.nrtwc.org. nrtwc.org.
Mark Mix, the people are with you. Keep up the good work, and we'll talk to you again.
Thanks, John.